It all started with dinner. Jenny and I were at our country house in North Carolina, just the two of us, sitting across from each other at the worn wooden table we'd shared for over a decade. The air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic, the kind of meal we'd had 100 times before. Everything should have felt normal, but it didn't. She was quiet that night, quieter than usual. I noticed it between bites, how she pushed her food around on her plate, how she glanced at me and then away, like she was weighing her words. And then, just as I was about to clear the dishes, I mentioned that it was time to pay the property tax. Her response was instant, sharp, almost defensive. "I don't want to talk about that right now," she said, her voice carrying an edge I wasn't used to. I set my fork down, studying her. "It's just the usual, Jen. Nothing's changed." Her lips pressed into a thin line. That's exactly the problem. Something in the way she said it, cold, clipped, made my stomach twist. We had been together for 12 years. In that time, we had weathered financial struggles, family drama, and the slow, inevitable changes that come with aging side by side. And sure, there had been disagreements like any couple, but never had she spoken to me like that. Never had she made me feel like I was the obstacle in her way. I let the silence stretch, waiting for her to explain. She didn't. Instead, she stood up, grabbed her plate, and walked to the sink without another word. I sat there, staring at the spot where she'd been, my appetite suddenly gone. "Do you want to tell me what's really wrong?" I asked finally. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run over the dishes before answering. I feel like I don't have control over anything anymore." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She shook her head, sighing as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Forget it, Chris. It's nothing. Nothing." I knew her well enough to know that was a lie. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. Had I missed something? Had I done something? I thought about the years we'd spent building this life, how I had always been the one making sure things ran smoothly, handling the responsibilities so she didn't have to. I was the one who made sure the mortgage was paid on time, who dealt with the insurance, the repairs, the everyday minutiae that kept our world from falling apart. It wasn't something I resented. I did it because I loved her, because I wanted to take care of her. And yet, in that one sentence, she had turned it all into a burden, as if I was the weight she needed to shake off. I turned onto my side, watching the way the moonlight cast soft shadows across her face. She was already asleep, her expression peaceful. But I wasn't. A thought took root in my mind, something I couldn't shake. Maybe she didn't want me to take care of her anymore. Maybe she wanted something else, something different. I wasn't sure what that meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek when she got out of bed, hummed to herself as she made coffee, scrolled through her phone like she wasn't the same woman who had practically recoiled from me the night before. "Got any plans for today?" she asked as she poured herself a cup. I studied her, wondering if she was going to bring it up, if she was going to tell me what was really on her mind. I almost asked, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear that I wouldn't like the answer. So instead, I just shook my head. "Just work. The usual." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "All right, I think I might head into town for a bit. Do some shopping." Shopping. Jenny wasn't the type to shop aimlessly. She was practical to a fault. If she was going out, it was for a reason. I wanted to ask what she was shopping for. I wanted to ask if she'd be back for dinner. But I didn't. I just watched as she grabbed her purse, slipped on her shoes, and left without looking back. Something felt different. Something felt wrong. I sat in that silence for a long time before finally pulling out my laptop and getting to work. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. That night, when she came home, I could tell she'd been crying. Her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smudged. She tried to hide it, plastering on a smile as she set a bag down on the counter, but I could see right through her. "Hey," I said carefully, standing up from the couch. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, and then, finally, she sighed. "I don't know, Chris. I really don't. I took a step closer, my stomach twisting. Talk to me. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years I realized how far apart we had drifted. And in that moment I made a decision. If she wanted a life without restrictions, I would give it to her. The next morning I didn't bring it up. I let her move around the kitchen like nothing had changed. Let her pour her coffee and stare at her phone while I sat at the table, pretending to read the news. The air between us felt different now, charged with something unspoken, but I wasn't going to be the one to break the silence. She glanced at me once, then again, like she was waiting for me to say something, maybe even daring me to, but I didn't. Instead, I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my emails like I didn't notice the way she kept adjusting her grip on her mug, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she always did when she was nervous. Finally, she sighed, setting her cup down with a quiet clink. I have a lot to do today, she said. I nodded. Yeah, me too. She hesitated, like she was waiting for me to ask. Where are you going? What do you have to do? Who are you meeting? But I didn't ask. Her lips pressed together, and then she stood up, brushing past me on her way to the door. I'll see you later. I heard her car pull out of the driveway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to fix this. If she wanted distance, I was going to give it to her. So I let the day pass without checking in. I worked. I took my time making lunch. I sat on the back porch, staring at the trees, feeling the quiet settle into my bones in a way it hadn't in years. Normally, I would have texted her by now. Normally, I would have asked if she needed anything, if she wanted me to pick up dinner, if she was on her way home. But today I didn't. The hours ticked by. The sky started to darken, and still I heard nothing from her. At 8 o'clock, I finally stood up from the couch and stretched, my muscles stiff from sitting in the same position for too long. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, then closed it again. I wasn't hungry. Not really. I checked my phone. No messages. 9 o'clock. Still nothing. I sat back down, turned on the TV, stared at the screen without actually watching anything. 10 o'clock. At 10:30, I heard the sound of her car in the driveway, the soft crunch of gravel under tires, the engine cutting off. A moment later, the door opened. I didn't move from the couch. Jenny walked in, pausing when she saw me sitting there in the dim light of the TV. She looked tired, maybe even a little surprised to see me awake. Hey, she said, her voice careful. You're still up. I shrugged. Yeah. She hesitated, toeing off her shoes. I lost track of time. I didn't say anything. She lingered in the doorway, like she wasn't sure what to do next. Then, finally, she sighed and crossed the room, dropping onto the couch beside me. The scent of something unfamiliar clung to her. Not perfume exactly, not anything strong, just different. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen, her hands in her lap. Then she reached over and took the remote, flipping through channels like nothing was wrong, like everything was normal. And maybe to her it still was, but to me it wasn't. It didn't matter where she had been. What mattered was that she hadn't told me. What mattered was that she had waited to see if I would ask. And I hadn't, and that, more than anything, seemed to bother her. I saw the way her fingers tightened around the remote, the way her breathing changed just slightly. She turned her head, watching me. You're quiet tonight. I smiled faintly. Guess I don't have much to say. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to figure out what I was thinking, what I knew. But I wasn't going to give her anything. She exhaled, looking away. I'm going to bed. She stood up, hesitating for a fraction of a second before walking down the hall. A moment later, I heard the bedroom door click shut. I stayed on the couch, staring at the dark screen in front of me. For the first time in 12 years, I realized I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was letting her go. The next few days passed in the same quiet rhythm. She stopped asking me where I was going, what I was doing, and I stopped offering. I let her handle the things she had always left to me, the bills, the house, the car. I didn't remind her when the trash needed to go out. I didn't check if the mail had been picked up. At first, she didn't seem to notice. And then, slowly, she did. Her frustration started in small ways. An exasperated sigh when she realized the dishwasher hadn't been run. The way she stood in front of the mailbox for too long, staring at the stack of envelopes like she didn't know what to do with them. One night, I heard her on the phone, her voice tight with stress. "I don't know," she was saying. "I guess I just thought, never mind. It's fine." I didn't ask who she was talking to. I didn't need to. I already knew. By the end of the week, something shifted again. She started watching me differently, like she was waiting for something. Maybe for me to crack. Maybe for me to ask if she was okay. Maybe for me to go back to the way things had always been. But I wasn't going to, because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one chasing after her. And she didn't know what to do with that. The tension in the house thickened with each passing day. At first, Jenny carried on as if she didn't notice. She went through her routines, leaving in the mornings without saying much, coming home late, keeping her phone close. But the more I withdrew, the more it unsettled her. I could see it in the way she hesitated before speaking, the way she lingered near me as if waiting for me to step in and take control again. One evening, she stood in front of the fridge, staring at the nearly empty shelves, her fingers drumming on the handle. "When are you going grocery shopping?" she asked without looking at me. I was sitting at the table, flipping through an old magazine, pretending I wasn't paying attention to the way she gripped the fridge door a little too hard. "I figured you'd take care of it," I said casually. She turned, her brow furrowing. "You always do it." I shrugged. "I thought maybe you'd want to handle it this time." She studied me, waiting for me to smile, to let her know I was joking. But I wasn't. I went back to the magazine, turning a page I hadn't even read. A beat of silence. Then she huffed, grabbing her keys from the counter. "Fine. I'll do it." She stormed out the door, slamming it harder than necessary. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. The truth was, I had already gone to the store earlier that day. There was plenty of food in the house, but she hadn't bothered to check. She had just expected things to be done, the way they always had been. I wondered how long it would take before she realized that wasn't the case anymore. The changes didn't stop there. When the garbage piled up, I left it. When the sink clogged, I didn't grab my tools. When the electricity flickered from an overdue payment, I let her be the one to make the call. At first, she handled it all with forced determination, acting as if she was fine. But I saw the cracks forming. I saw the way she sighed when she checked the mail, the way she rubbed her temples when she had to figure out the bills, the way she sat in the car longer than usual after coming home, as if gathering the energy to step inside. And yet, she never asked for my help. Maybe pride kept her from it. Maybe she was still trying to prove something to herself. One night, I heard her in the bathroom, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew she was on the phone. "I don't know what's going on with him," she said, frustration creeping into her tone. It's like he's different. He doesn't ask me anything anymore. He doesn't care." A pause. Then her voice dropped even lower. "I thought this is what I wanted." I leaned against the wall outside the bedroom, my heart pounding. So that was it. She had wanted something to change. She had wanted space, control, something more than what we had. And now, standing in the mess of it, she wasn't sure she wanted it anymore. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I waited until I heard her say goodnight, until I heard her place her phone on the nightstand and crawl into bed. When I finally joined her, she was still awake. I could feel it in the way she held herself stiffly, in the way she kept her back to me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. She was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. The next day, she tried a different approach. She came home earlier than usual, setting a bag of takeout on the counter, her movements deliberate. "I figured we could eat together," she said, glancing at me. I looked up from my laptop, pretending to think about it. "Yeah, sure." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She pulled out plates, setting the food between us. For the first time in weeks, we sat down at the table together. She took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" I chewed my food, swallowed, and nodded. Fine. Silence stretched between us. She tried again. Do you have any plans this weekend? I shrugged. Not really. She tapped her fingers against the table, her frustration barely concealed. You don't have to act like this, you know? I raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like nothing is wrong. I set my fork down. Is something wrong? Her mouth opened, then shut. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Forget it. She barely touched her food after that. I finished my meal, took my plate to the sink, and left her sitting there alone. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt her. I just wanted her to feel what I had felt for so long. Days passed. The silence between us grew heavier. Then, one evening, she broke. She stood in the living room, her hands clenched into fists, her face flushed with anger. Why are you doing this? I stayed seated, my expression calm. Doing what? This? She gestured wildly. Acting like I don't exist. Like none of this matters. I exhaled, leaning forward. I thought this is what you wanted. Her eyes flashed. I never wanted this. I tilted my head. Didn't you? She stared at me, her breath shaky. I just wanted... She stopped, her voice catching. I just wanted to feel like I had a choice. I studied her, my chest tight. And now that you have one, you don't know what to do with it. Her jaw clenched. She looked away. For the first time in weeks, I saw it, the regret, the doubt, the realization that maybe she had been wrong. I stood up, walking past her. She didn't stop me. And for the first time since this all started, I didn't look back. The next morning, she wasn't in bed when I woke up. I listened for the sound of her in the kitchen, the quiet shuffle of her routine, but the house was silent. I got up, walked to the window, and saw her car still in the driveway. She hadn't left. I found her sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. She didn't look up when I walked in. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then, finally, she exhaled. I don't know how we got here. I sat down across from her, resting my elbows on my knees. You don't. Her head lowered, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater. I thought I wanted something different. I nodded, waiting. She swallowed hard. I thought I needed to get away from you to find myself again. I thought maybe I'd been living too much in your shadow, letting you take care of everything while I just existed. I kept my face neutral, but inside, something twisted. She wasn't completely wrong. I had taken care of everything. I had made sure our life ran smoothly, that she never had to worry about the things I did. But I hadn't done it to control her. I had done it because I loved her. She wiped at her eyes. But the truth is, I didn't feel trapped because of you. I felt trapped because of me. Because I didn't know who I was anymore. And instead of figuring it out, I blamed you. Her voice cracked on the last word. And for the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Regret. I leaned back against the couch, my gaze steady. And now, she hesitated, her fingers twisting together. Now I just feel lost. The words hung between us. I should have felt relief hearing her admit it. I should have felt something. But all I felt was empty. For weeks, I had been the one left in the dark. I had been the one waiting, the one wondering what was happening while she pulled away. And now, when she was finally ready to talk, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. I sighed, rubbing my hands over my face. Jenny, I don't know if we can come back from this. She flinched. Chris. No. I cut her off gently. I mean it. I don't know if I want to. Her face crumpled. I don't want to lose you. I stared at her, searching for the right words. You already did. She made a choked sound, like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. But it was the truth. The love I had for her, the certainty, the trust. It had all been eroded, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she nodded. Okay. A single word, but it carried more weight than anything else she had said. We didn't say much after that. She went upstairs, and I went outside, sitting on the porch as the morning sun slowly rose over the trees. The next few days passed quietly. There was no more fighting, no more tension. Just an understanding that we had reached the end. She started packing her things without me asking. She didn't cry. Neither did I. On the morning she left, she stood in the doorway with her bag in hand, looking at me like she wanted to say something. I waited. But in the end, she just gave me a small, sad smile. "Goodbye, Chris." I nodded. "Goodbye, Jenny." And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. It didn't feel like freedom. It just felt like nothing. Weeks passed. The house felt different without her. Quieter, emptier. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I had spent so long taking care of her, of us, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just exist on my own. But little by little, I started figuring it out. I picked up old hobbies. I went out with friends I hadn't seen in years. I stopped waiting for my phone to buzz with a message from her. And then, one evening, I met someone new. Lily wasn't like Jenny. She was confident, steady, the kind of person who knew exactly what she wanted. We started talking, then seeing each other, and before I knew it, I was smiling again without even realizing it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself. Then, a month after Jenny left, she came back. I heard the knock at the door and knew before I even opened it that it was her. She stood there, her eyes scanning the house like she expected it to be the same as she had left it. It wasn't. She hesitated. "Hey, hey," I said, keeping my voice even. She shifted on her feet. I wanted to see you." I studied her, taking in the way she fidgeted with the strap of her bag, the way her eyes darted past me, like she was looking for something. And then I realized. She thought she could come back. She thought she had walked away from something that would always be there waiting for her. But she had been gone too long. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the silence stretch. Then, from behind me, Lily's voice. "Chris? Who is it?" Jenny stiffened. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I turned my head slightly. "Just someone I used to know." Jenny's face paled. She stared at me, her breath catching, and for the first time, I saw understanding settle in. She had been so sure I would be there, waiting. But I wasn't. I smiled faintly, stepping back. "Take care, Jenny." And before she could say anything else, I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, my heartbeat steady, my mind clear. Then I turned, walking back into the house, into my life, and never looked back.